go. Thank you for the introduction and thank you for the invitation to speak here today. I will be talking a bit about the role of regional sea conventions for offshore storage here in Europe. There are, of course, many regional sea conventions, but since we are in Europe, the focus will be on Europe. And what I want the main takeaway to be for you following this presentation is that these instruments will dictate if and where you can store and under what circumstances and criteria. And I will explain why that is. First, a bit about my firm, IOM Law, founded by Lena W Østgaard in 2017. We specialize in CCS, CCUS, and negative emissions technologies, anything to do with CO2 really, and we are actually the only law firm in the world specializing in this field. We are 6 team members based in Norway, Australia, and Denmark, and together we have experience with oil and gas, energy law, climate change law and policy, and international law, and so on. So this presentation follows the CCUS SEN project, which is a Horizon Europe funded project, which the aim is to accelerate the deployment of CCUS in the Baltic Sea region and the Mediterranean Sea region. We're going to take learnings from the North Sea region and transfer knowledges and best practices, where the outcome hopefully will be identifying viable value chains in those regions. And Iselin will be talking more about this project tomorrow. But essentially, there are 6 work packages, and this presentation follows work package 2, which focuses on non-technical aspects, where IOM Law has done a legal mapping of applicable national legal frameworks and international and regional legal instruments that have bearing on CCS operations in those countries. Now, there are 4 regional sea conventions in Europe. That's the Oslo Convention, Helsinki Convention, Barcelona Convention, and the Bucharest Convention. And since we are in Italy, I will be focusing mostly on the Barcelona Convention today. And I will also very briefly talk about the Oslo Convention and the Helsinki Convention. And that's because those 2 instruments, one allows storage, the other one prohibits storage. And it's an interesting comparison when you look at the contracting parties that are party to both instruments. So I just want to showcase what that looks like on the ground and implications of this. And they all have a similar aim, and that is to protect the marine environment from human activities. The main takeaway here is that, as you probably all know, you can store under the Oslo Convention. It was adopted in 92, entered into force in 98, and essentially it merged or replaced rather 2 pre-existing conventions. And it implements what is referred to as the reverse list approach, which you see in the London Protocol, which that's the way you regulate dumping activities. So it places a general ban on all dumping activities, and then it sets out a list of exceptions to this ban. And that's often where you see the issue with storage, because storage is considered dumping. So if CO2 is not included on the list of exception, you cannot store. And that was an issue under the Oslo Convention, but that was rectified in a 2007 amendment, when an amendment was made to Annex 2 and 3. And now they also adopted guidelines and criteria for this to occur. And the criteria are essentially the same as the London Protocol. The Helsinki Convention, however, originally signed in 1974, entered into force in 1980, but then it was updated as well and amended, and that was in 1992. And this also follows the reverse list approach. So it implements a general ban on all dumping activities, but this instrument is actually more strict than the Oslo Convention and the London Protocol, because there's only one exception to this ban, and that is dredged material. So this means, as the instrument stands today, you cannot store in the Baltic Sea. What I think is interesting is that the Commission has made clear that the Convention will be updated and amended whenever deemed necessary, such as to follow developments in international environmental law and maritime laws. And I think it's interesting to reflect on the developments that it's occurring. You can now store in the Oslo Convention and the London Protocol. So there is a general shift here that seeks to regulate offshore storage and provide criteria for this to occur. And also, there are some interesting ongoing discussions among the contracting parties. There was an informal meeting of some of the contracting parties this summer, where Poland, among other countries, talked about Article 11 in the context of CCS operations and how this barrier could potentially be overcome. Without speculating, I presume then that an amendment to Article 11 will be necessary to allow for storage, adding CO2 as an exception, like you did with the Oslo Convention and the London Protocol before it. So this is just to show that just because it's prohibited today does not mean it's going to be banned forever. And here is where you see the implication of having 2 regimes, 2 opposing regimes, if you will, where one allows storage, the other one prohibits it. If I get this gadget to work. So for Sweden and Denmark in particular, you see the implications. So all of Sweden's eastern continental shelf, that's off limits. But they can't store under offshore, which is here. So this line is sort of the geographical line that separates the two conventions. So the same applies for Denmark. They can't store down here, but they can store here, case in point being Project Greensand. Now to the Barcelona Convention, which covers the Mediterranean Sea. The Barcelona Convention is a more unique convention for storage because it has two dumping protocols. And the convention itself was adopted in '76, and then it was updated and renamed in '95. And the first dumping protocol follows this timeline, so that was adopted in '76 as well. But then you got a new protocol in '95, which follows more of the London Protocol development. So it's much more precautionary and restrictive. I'll talk a bit more about the second convention on the next slide. But the '76 protocol, which is in force, implements the black and gray list approach, which you may have heard about under the London Convention. And essentially what that means is that the black list sets out waste and other matter that you cannot dump, and the gray list sets out the waste and other matter that you may be able to dump if you have a price special permit to do so. All other waste and other matter you can be able to store if you have a general permit to do so. Under the first dumping protocol, CO2 is not listed on either of those two lists, which implies you can store with general permit. Yes. So the updated protocol, and the main takeaway here that I want you to think about is that you can store, but you may have a problem when this protocol enters into force, because this is much more restrictive. So it implements the reverse list approach, and it sets out the waste and other matter that you can dump, exceptions to the ban, and you need a permit to do so. But on this list, CO2 is not included, which means you have the same issue that you did with the London Protocol and the Oslo Convention pre-amendments, and then the current issue that you have under the Helsinki Convention. So if or when this protocol enters into force, there may be some issues. There are some observations that I have made, and I think if or when this protocol enters into force, and the reason that it's not in force, I think, is procedural. You need a 3/4 majority to have accepted any amendments to the protocol or the convention, and I don't think they reach that requirement. The protocol is almost 30 years old, so I would suspect that they would update it and amend it should it be close to entering into force. And at that point, it could make sense, and I would hope that the contracting parties would sit amongst themselves and consider what is their position to offshore storage. And in that regard, they are having their meeting of the contracting parties in December, which would be a good opportunity to address any uncertainties, because these are a lot of uncertainties considering that a lot of countries in the Mediterranean are working on offshore storage projects. You know, the Ravenna hub that we're going to hear more about, and also Greece active with offshore storage. So I think this point of clarification is absolutely needed for the contracting parties. They're also revising the marine spatial planning. How am I doing on time? Okay, good. Marine spatial planning essentially is a way to regulate activities on the seabed and on the sea. And in this, now it's not mentioning CCS at all, of course, but since they're revising it, maybe they would allocate a space for offshore storage operations. So I think it would be a good opportunity, and there may be ongoing conversations that we are not privy to as we're not a contracting party. But that remains to be seen, and I think COP 2023 could be a good opportunity to address these uncertainties. And again, so the conclusion here is that these regional sea conventions will dictate if and where you can store and under what criteria and circumstances. And what you see is that there are different rules for different regions, and that can have major implications for countries such as Sweden and Denmark, where that will dictate you can store on this side, you cannot store on that side. And you may wonder what the implications of the London Protocol is, or you may not, but I will tell you anyway. And that the London Protocol, of course, is an international treaty. These are regional sea conventions. So you may think, for instance, for Sweden, being a contracting party to both HELCOM and the London Protocol, why can't they store if the London Protocol allows for storage and sets out criteria, and the HELCOM does not? And that's just big principle international law. Lex specialis, the specific rule would take precedent over a general rule, and the stricter rule will apply. But you can see, for instance, I didn't mention the Bucharest Convention because I don't have time, but what I will just comment on is that they follow the black and gray list approach. CO2 is not listed, so in theory, you could store in the Black Sea with a general permit. But there are no criteria for storage to occur. So if you're a contracting party to the Bucharest Convention, and you're also a contracting party to the London Protocol, the implications here would be that if you're going to store, you're going to have to do it according to the London Protocol requirements. And I'm not going to add any more details to that, because that's enough. Acknowledgements, EU Horizon 2020, and that is it for me. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Lena. Are there any burning questions of clarification? Okay, I think we're good, though I'm sure there will be some questions in the discussion session. Thank you very much, Lena. So we will now move on to the last presentation of this session from Lena W Østgaard.